Okay, I think we can get started here. Hi everybody. My name is Lucas Fraser. I'm the president of Connecting Environmental Professionals Ottawa, the host of this event. We're a nonprofit, volunteer-led organization in Ottawa.
I feel like it's hard to be an expert during these times because all of us are kind of going through this together. But in terms of telling all of you a little bit about myself, so I'm a human resources and recruitment professional. I'm born and raised in Ottawa, which I'm super proud to have done so. I love to travel. I hate the word foodie, but I'd consider myself a foodie because I can't cook. And I'm also planning a wedding during COVID, which is interesting and fun to say the least. In terms of my career and my career path, it's actually something I'm proud of. What ended up as a 5-day long data entry contract that I took right when I graduated university, it actually turned into me being at that particular organization for almost 5 years. So I took a data entry contract right when I graduated, was actually planning on working the 5 days and then going to travel the world after. You can't underestimate a water cooler chat is what I like to say. I got in there for the 5 days. I talked to as many people as I could. And then after a few months of being continuously extended on contracts, the human resources team at that organization approached me and asked if I had considered a career in human resources. And the rest is history. I ended up being at that organization for, like I said, almost 5 years, kind of got exposure to a variety of human resources functions. Actually left the organization to pursue a master's degree, which wasn't the right program for myself, long story short, and ended up at LRO Staffing, which is a boutique and local search and staffing firm. So I work with organizations across a variety of industries in the private sector mostly, and I help them find the perfect candidates in the areas of HR, communications, administration, and I've been on the technical and IT side as well. So I've been there at LRO Staffing for almost 3 years now.
Thanks, Julia. That was a great introduction, and underscoring the point that no job is too small, and it can lead to it can open doors for you and further pathways. So thanks for that introduction to yourself, and helping us recognize that key point all over again. Next, we'll go to Najaa Rauf, who's the director of People and Culture at Spark Power. Najaa, love to hear from you. Tell us more about yourself and your career path.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for inviting me today. This is really exciting, and I'm always very excited to provide feedback and give guidance in things such as these. I do have a wonderful talent acquisition team that supports our function, so I did pick their brains a little bit before coming here today. My name's Najaa. I have an undergraduate degree in science from McMaster University. During that time, science wasn't 100, the more traditional science wasn't 100% my thing. So I ended up really focusing in psychology, really was interested in, how people think and how groups work. And so that sort of led me down this pathway of really being involved in types of roles that had to do with people and engagement. From there, I actually was working in not-for-profits for a while, and I decided to go back to school to get my business degree. So I have an MBA from Brock University, the business school there, and I specialized in human resources. It sort of coupled with my interest in engagement and people and teams and development. And so while I was there, I actually graduated and landed with a job at the Goodman School of Business in something called student engagement. So I worked with a variety of student organizations at the business school that were trying to develop themselves in a co-curricular model. It was a little bit different from, working in a co-op office and working in academic advising. I really got a chance to engage with a very high potential group of student volunteers. So that was very Very cool. I did that for about 4 years. And then I transitioned into a role after that with Spark Power Corp. So Spark Power Corp was, just starting as an organization. We were about 400 employees. It had been around for, I want to say 7 years or so at the time, primarily grew through acquisitions. So here I am almost 4 years later, a little over 3.5 years later, and we're now 1,200 employees. An HR team of about 12 people. So we rebranded to People and Culture a while back, and really I got a chance to focus all of my passion in people and engagement into this role, and really grow and develop a team that supports our larger organization. So like I just said before, we have a really amazing talent acquisition team. They're small but mighty, as I like to call them, that has been through the ups and downs. And COVID has really challenged us this year, and it's really great to see everyone come together and support the broader organization for sure. So that's my trajectory.
Hey, thanks, Najaa. That's good to hear that you're working with an organization that's seen high growth, and it must be a challenging environment to be there and get the right kind of talent. So that'd be very interesting to hear later. Let's go to our next panelist, Sarah Casorso from Eco Canada. Sarah has joined us today from all the way from Calgary. So thank you so much, Sarah, and tell us all about yourself and how you landed at Eco Canada.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks everybody for having me. It's great to chat with people across the country. Eco Canada is a Canada-wide organization. So typically we travel lots, but obviously with COVID right now, we're not traveling. So it's nice to connect virtually with everyone. So my background is I grew up in Vancouver and I went to school there. I went to UBC, and then once I graduated, obviously there was opportunities in Calgary at the time, and I had friends here, so I moved out 11 years ago and have been pursuing a career in HR ever since. I've worked for different nonprofits. I've worked for land surveying companies, and now I'm at Eco Canada, which is a nonprofit as well that specializes, or I kind of say that we're like an HR organization for the environmental industry. So we've had significant growth at Eco as well, not quite as much as Spark, but when I started over 3 years ago, we had just under 20 employees, and now we're around 62. So I've been responsible for the recruitment in terms of all of those internal positions. And then recently, since June, I've actually stepped into the senior manager role of the employment programs as well, which is basically managing an HR project, I like to think of it as, where we have funding from the federal government to create jobs. ECO's been doing this for 23 years, but with different government, we're seeing the volume of funding quite high, and then COVID came along, and so we are actually in the business of creating jobs. And I've just been working on my quarterly reports for our funders, and different departments were creating like 300, 500, 2,000 jobs in a year for the under 30. The 15 to 30 is the jobs that we create or help create and match. But there's lots of opportunity that I can hopefully speak to later on in this panel conversation about the things that we've been seeing at ECO.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think that our participants will be really interested to learn about the programs that you're managing and the jobs that you're helping create and how they can access those opportunities, especially given pandemic. There's no job fairs happening. There are some virtual ones and so on. So it's reduced kind of that exposure to the jobs for a lot of participants. So that's great to hear from all of you about that. So let's get into the next question that I have for you, which is how has COVID impacted recruiting? Do you think it's a short-term thing, or you think it's just going to be long-term where everything's going to be virtual maybe? What do our panelists think about that? Let's start with Julia again. Let's hear your views on this.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be a lot more of a long-term change than any of us anticipated. At least that's what myself and my colleagues have been saying. I think at the start of this, everyone thought it would just be a few weeks, and obviously we're approaching several months now. So I think to say that its impact on recruitment is going to be short term, I don't think that is the case. I think we got to get used to the virtual interview. So I'm sure some of the guidance that the fellow panelists will provide later will assist in that. I know at least in the Ottawa market space, there's certainly more competition for jobs because there's a number of individuals who have been laid off. And so I really think putting your best foot forward is going to be so important. And again, I think that's something we'll be getting into later. In terms of how it has changed recruitment and just the overall job experience for individuals, I think that there's going to be a lot more emphasis on work-life balance and flexibility. I don't want to say that I think, and feel free to disagree, my understanding, I don't think too many organizations will be getting rid of their spaces entirely and switching to a purely virtual realm of things. I do think people still really do value kind of that in-person aspect to the job. I know I do myself, but I do think we're going to see a much more flexible workplace culture. I think what I've really seen is I think more of an appreciation for the fact that we're not sitting in our desks for kind of traditional hours now. I think that there's that recognition that when you get your work done, you can go for that walk or you can do other things. And I think it's really adjusted the scope of and that perspective that there's that traditional kind of 9 to 5, I'm sitting in a chair, I'm sitting at a desk. I think there's way more flexibility. And I think that will be a very long-term change, even when organizations hopefully move back to, more of an in-person traditional office space.
Thanks for that. So Najaa, what are your views on this?
I think it's really interesting. We've had to shift to, virtual platforms more now, so that COVID has really ultimately, I think, changed a lot of that. And so you have more traditional sort of individuals who are like, I have to do an in-person interview, and I need to meet with a person or grab a coffee with them. And while that's great, and I don't think that will ever go away, there are going to be maybe times where that's not going to be available to people, and they are and the business still has to run. You still have to hire people. So we found that before, the assessment portion of the resume and the phone screen, were a lot shorter. Now I think it's sort of taken up more precedence because you're making your decision based a lot more on these factors than before. If you can't meet the person in person, then you only have a few items to go off of. And I think that's when, even the video calls, right? You don't always get somebody's body language or how their interaction is. So it's definitely going to have a shift. And we found some managers are actually adapting to it quite well. They're sort of learning, you can't just meet the person and say, oh, I have a good vibe and I want to hire them. And, now you're focused on what are the questions that I'm asking? How am I assessing the responses? And, how are we using the other tools at our disposal to do it? And I think in the long run, it's actually saving people a lot of time too as well, where, normally you can't, you have a certain number of hours, like Julia said, in the day that you're in the office, and then you have to make the commute home, and you're less inclined to be like, okay, I'll stay and I'll do a 5 p.m. interview. Now more and more people are like, okay, well, I'm gonna take my break at 4, and then yeah, sure, I'll jump on a phone call at 5 o'clock or a video call at 5 o'clock. So we're finding a little bit more flexibility there. And then I think local employees is another interesting piece that sort of echo what Julia says. Because of the flexible work environment, telecommuting is becoming a little bit more of an easy pill to swallow. Whereas before, you might look at a candidate and say, oh, that candidate doesn't want to drive an hour and a half every day. They're asking flexibility to work from home. That's not really normal in our office environment. Now it's more like, well, now that we have COVID, we've had to adapt to that, and we've been forced to think that way and use all the tools and that we have available to us. So it's really, I think, forced a huge mindset shift. And I think in the long run, recruiting is going to be one of the biggest impacted pieces of that. I don't think we're going to shift away from utilizing virtual tools. And I think managers are sort of shifting their mindset towards it. So it does help for sort of our team when we're trying to have managers think differently. It does definitely support that theory. So yeah, it's been good in that way.
Yeah, definitely some key points around the flexibility portion. I actually had a kind of a question later on that as well. So let's hear from Sarah on this. Like, how do you think recruiting's changing? Is it a short-term or long-term thing? How do you think it's going to change in the sustainability space?
Yeah, so I'll kind of just piggyback off the previous responses because I'm in agreement with those, and I just think it's a mindset shift for everyone involved that it's not a temporary fix, and this is kind of the way that for the foreseeable future that things are going to be. And we've been recruiting internally at ECO over the summer and had really high success rates in terms of who we're meeting with and who we actually hire and how it works out. Like, I'm not noticing a huge difference between like an in-person interview and a virtual one. Obviously the technology piece can sometimes get in the way, and so you do have to make sure that you've got a backup phone number and that kind of thing. But I think also at ECO internally, for the hiring that we've done, we are starting to look to other areas of the country because it's proven that these positions are capable of not having to come in and be at the office. And so because of that, it makes recruiting a little bit more challenging because, just the volume of candidates that we have to assess is so much higher. But it really means that we're getting the right people in the seat because there's just much more selection for us. So that's something that I think has been encouraging because as I've seen in my career, organizations typically are a little bit slower to respond to what candidates are looking for. And so I think this is bringing that to the table now that it's demonstrating that people can work across the country and still be successful, whether they have to work in a different time zone or whatever that may be. You still can be connected, engaged, and productive.
That's actually a very good thing to hear, right? There's often this thing amongst when people are applying to jobs, looking for local candidates or trying to figure out whether they should put their address on their resume or not, and those kind of things. And I think this acceptance of having these telecommuting workers and telecommuting employees definitely kind of takes that pressure off a little from folks who are kind of applying for a job where they can apply to a job because they like it and not, they don't have to care whether it's in Ottawa anymore or not, or whether it's in Toronto. And it, let's see if that stays that way once we're past this COVID period, hopefully. For kind of some of the next questions, I think I'll start with Sarah first. Sarah, I think we all want to hear more about what you think about the environmental and sustainability jobs landscape. What do you think is the future in it? And also, talk about a bit about ECO Canada's programs that could help, our participants get some of those jobs.
Sure. So I guess maybe I'll start with just a general overview of some of the numbers that our research team is putting out. So we have a team that is solely developing different labor market research reports. And so some of the, data has sort of been skewed with COVID coming out. We were set to release some numbers and then COVID happened. So some of our numbers might change depending on what we're actually talking about. But typically speaking, like the 10-year forecast that we're seeing is that there's going to be a huge need for environmental related positions, that's where the growth is going to be, mostly in, like environmental protection, resource management, and sustainability. they're attributing a lot of the demand to retirement. So there's going to be a lot of workers leaving the industry to, you know, do their golden years, golfing or whatever that may be. And then, you know, maybe, so like of the jobs that we're saying will come available, 75 are probably going to be due to retirement and that kind of thing. Whereas 25% might just be net new type jobs. So that's promising, and that's really, you know, interesting information that our team is coming out with. We're also seeing that environmental jobs or sustainability jobs are across all industries. So, you know, typically people have thought of an environmental job as a certain thing, but we're really showing that every industry across the country has a focus on that, you know, especially in Alberta where I am. Oil and gas has a tremendous amount of jobs that are related to, you know, clean tech, sustainability, renewables, like all of those things. So there's lots of opportunity that we're seeing in sort of like a 10-year forecast. In terms of like what EcoCanada offers, well, we have a lot of different programs and services. We like to say that we have something for everybody throughout their career. So we've got, like what I look after, the wage funding opportunities and the internships that are funded by different arms of the federal government. So that would be for, you know, recent graduates, or we have co-op programs, and those don't have any age limit. So if somebody is deciding to return to school, they would still qualify for a co-op wage funding opportunity that we have. But then we have lots of other resources. So we have our EP, so that's our environmental professional designation. We've got mentoring opportunities within that. We have an environmental job board where our, you know, a lot of the key employers that we've worked with for our history of 26 years always come to us because they know that the people who subscribe to our newsletters or who interact with our products and services are the people that they're looking for. And so you would go to our job board and you'd see roles that are specific to the industry that you're looking for. We're actually in the process. I had meetings today with a company that we're going to be improving our job board, and we're going to really be doing some AI matching for job seekers and employers. So it's going to notify you when a job comes up that meets what your resume says, and vice versa. So that's a really cool feature that we're going to have towards the end of the year. And then you also were mentioning career fairs and virtual career fairs. So we're going to try our hand at that November 25th, and it's across Canada. So there'll be booths from employers across the country, but that's something that we're looking to try out now that we can't do everything in person, because we were doing a ton of networking events and chapter events in every sort of major city across the country or where we had a lot of members. And so we're all interacting online with our networking, our career fair, our courses, all of that. So I would definitely encourage people to come to our website and just sort of see what is available to them, because like I said, we have something for everybody in terms of a student or somebody who is maybe towards the end of their career and, you know, they want to go for our designation as an auditor or whatever that may be. There's lots of different opportunity and networking for our different stakeholders and members.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I encourage everybody who's participating in the panel today to check out EcoCanada's website and see what programs might be suitable for you at your stage of job search or, you know, career progression. There's some, you know, that could really help you with some good opportunities. Thanks for that, Sarah. So Najaa, let's talk a bit more about Spark Power, the kind of roles that, you know, Spark Power has that you look to fill in with candidates, and how do you think recruiting might, you know, change a little as we move forward, and how, you know, it might look in the future for you specifically?
Yeah, so Spark Power is a little bit of, you know, we call it from pole to product. So we have, you know, 5 different, let's call it lines of business. We have a technical services line, which is high and low voltage power services, medium voltage power services. So There we will hire engineers, technicians who, service and support projects across ICI customers across North America. We're into the US too as well with that. And then we have a renewables business. So that's solar, wind technicians, and they are in the renewable energy business as well. And again, they're out servicing wind turbines, installing solar panels, sort of, really getting into the nitty gritty of that area of the business. And then the third area, I think, which is interesting to probably this group, is we have a sustainability solutions business. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the company called Bullfrog Power, but they became part of Spark Power a few years back now. And they're, what they really do is they help support putting clean energy back into the grid. So they will work with large customers, they will work with residential services, and basically they allow for customers who do not have the opportunity to drive clean energy into their businesses to actually work with our company, and we help them put green energy basically back into the grid. So if they use X amount of energy in their residential, where they live, or if it's through a company, they pay a service fee, and we help broker or engage in putting green energy back into the grid. So it's a really interesting model. And they're moving into some really cool areas. Check them out, Bullfrog Power. Sign up for their newsletter. They have some really interesting and cool things going on, and they work very closely with their engineering team to really start thinking about what's the future of power. So, we sort of have these electrical power services that we need and we require right now, because that's what businesses are built on, right? In terms of using energy, not clean energy, right, from the grid and that sort of thing. But over time, how are we going to help our customers? How are we going to help, our partners switch over into a better and more clean energy model? And so that requires analysts, that requires project managers, engineers. We're into energy and battery storage now too as well. So we're working through partnerships with different organizations in how we, better qualify and support those projects. So there's a lot of cool opportunities. We hire obviously over time and as the needs are, but we're always looking for good people. So, one thing that we see happening right now with COVID is, if there is a need, sometimes people are a little bit afraid if they're in a current job, they're a little bit afraid to leave their current job. And so that's challenging because people just don't want the uncertainty. The other thing that we're finding is that people are trying to apply for roles that they may not quite be ready for yet or suited for. So I think what's going to happen, to be quite honest, is we're going to pivot a little bit in where we may not be able to find a senior level position to fill. We might find a really great up and coming, high potential individual who's, early in their career, who's willing to make that jump. So I would really, I'm really keen to see how that happens. And so I think Spark and other organizations are going to spend a lot of their time on their training and development programs, to be honest. I see that coming along. So, where you can't, where you aren't able to sort of bring in the talent, the top talent at that level, you bring in somebody that is hungry and eager and excited to be part of the team. And I think that's where we're going to see things moving. But we do hire everyone from marketing to sales. We have a corporate head office. We hire engineers, and we do also hire, individuals who are in sort of the energy service realm that are connected to that in some way, some point. You're on mute, Pallavi.
As usual. Well, thanks for bringing up those points. I really like the the point about kind of maybe hiring individuals at a level that they're not there yet, and then focusing on that training and development programs. And I think that really helps a lot of folks who are really trying to move up, but maybe kind of younger, but have a lot of passion about sustainability or clean power, to kind of really land that kind of a job and then progress in their career. So that, if companies do start focusing on that and not expecting, a fully formed, perfect employee, that's, that would definitely be very useful. Actually, I have a follow-up question with you, Najla, before we move forward. So do you think COVID has had any impact on the power sector? And I ask it from the perspective of like, do you see your company kind of, the growth accelerating? What are kind of the expectations?
So we did go through a period during COVID where there was a lot of uncertainty. Our customers were starting to not know whether or not they were considered an essential service. So they started winding down. There wasn't a lot of extra money to be spent on maintenance and repair, just the bare essentials. So we did see a dip, and I think it was just the panic of the pandemic, to be quite honest. And so now we're seeing that there is an uptick. So it's been great from that standpoint. Obviously, I think most organizations are either not hiring at the rate that they were before, but ICI customers still have to figure out ways to work, especially food and beverage companies, especially essential service companies, right? So something's broken, we need to go and repair it. The other thing that we're really seeing is with storms that are now happening, particularly in the U.S. We do have our lines and poles teams from Canada actually heading out to the U.S. to help support some of those storm initiatives, things that are happening down there as well. So there is growth, but I think from the perspective of other, like retail organizations and other industries, I don't think we will be hit as hard, to be honest, but we will have to manage the growth. So where organizations before were thinking about, like we talked about, headcount and bringing people in at senior levels, they might think about taking advantage of programs like Eco Canada. So I'm going to do a plug for Sarah here of Eco Canada, and seeing, if there's funding available and how we supplement that and those types of things. So you might see a little bit of a trajectory towards growing people from within the organization, as opposed to, really trying to hunt down those senior individuals and understanding, that succession planning mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thanks for that. So Julia, you talked about how, due to the pandemic, a lot of folks have lost their jobs and there's, a bit more competition now. So kind of let's bring the discussion back to the more recruiting side of things. How can the candidates, stand out in their CV or in a virtual interview? What are some of the things that they can do?
Absolutely. So this is what I love to talk about. This is why I'm so super passionate about what it is that I do. I did kind of write down, I have a list in front of me of kind of do's and don'ts in terms of either your resume or virtual interviewing. Because like we've all mentioned, I think this is going to be a longer term change than any of us had anticipated. So anyways, if I'm looking down at me, it's because I have a list because I don't want to miss anything. I think it's really going to be important in terms of standing out to, just because it's a virtual interview, it doesn't mean that you can't establish that virtual connection. I do think it involves things that seem silly, but things like smiling more, nodding more, maintaining that eye contact, because I think a lot of people in all of the interviews that I've done since this COVID time, you have some individuals who, they think that screen adds almost that barrier and that you can't tell when someone's, like looking at their phone in the corner, or it admittedly is way harder to kind of maintain that level of engagement and that interest level. So I think just not to underestimate that is really important. Again, there's a ton of basics that seem really obvious, but things like, again, doing your technical test before an interview. I've had very qualified candidates interview for positions, and whether it's a fault of their own or not, if there was any kind of hiccup technically where someone went on Zoom when the interview was supposed to be on Skype, you know, it can make a large difference. We are all human, and they're all, you know, things happen, like the doorbell could ring when you're in an interview with someone, or you have a dog bark, and those things do happen. And I think hiring managers are aware of that. But I just think, you know, if that's something you anticipate could happen, it doesn't do any harm to bring that up, you know, at the start of an interview, and just say, you know, I do have a dog who might bark, instead of just ignoring it. Dressing professionally is just as important. I've met with many candidates who assume that just because it's a virtual interview, that formality isn't there, and that they can, you know, show up wearing a t-shirt and a hoodie. So I think, again, business casual, you know, or even more formal than that is just, it's never going to be a bad thing, essentially. In terms of more of the resume side, again, kind of like we've all mentioned, there's competition for jobs is higher at the moment, and that's because there are more individuals who have been laid off. So it's it may sound super cliche, but just spending that extra time to tailor your resume to each position. I have noticed, I don't know about our other panelists, but I've noticed that the cover letter, in terms of hiring managers, I think a hiring manager would rather see an effective resume, and one that perhaps has a summary of your skills, as opposed to a cover letter. And so that's where I think spending that extra 20 minutes tailoring your resume to a position, as opposed to writing this long page, is going to be more effective. I've always been a fan of the chronological resume, which is listing your work experience chronologically, typically from most recent to least, as opposed to a functional resume. If you guys like, I can send you what kind of each of them are, and the difference as well afterwards. But I do find hiring managers prefer the chronological resume. LinkedIn is totally your friend. I think that's where a lot of talent acquisition and HR professionals do their searches. I think way more than people think. So LinkedIn is your friend, no matter how small you think your experience or any of that is. I just think it's a really worthwhile tool for networking and keeping that very professional as well. I think that's super important. And just again, in terms of overall preparedness, I've had candidates of mine who have interviewed with organizations, and afterwards they called me and they were like, you know what, I didn't prepare as much as I thought I should have. I think, again, people think with the virtual interview, it's a little less formal. And if anything, what I am coaching my clients on is that with this kind of new virtual hiring, virtual onboarding, I think it almost needs to be more of a tough interview, because you don't necessarily have those in-person cues to go off of. So I think, again, just kind of losing that assumption that just because something is done through video conferencing, that it's not going to be as formal. I think that's really, really important. And I'm probably rambling, but and I think what's really important is not to be too hard on ourselves as well. Again, I've spoken with lots of candidates who call me after they had an interview and they're like, oh, like I don't think I did well. It was hard to judge off the cues. And again, and I think it takes practice as well, interviewing in general, but let alone this new kind of virtual interview. So I just think to prepare as best you can, but don't be too hard on yourself, because we're all adjusting. And, you know, it all feels a little unnatural and uncomfortable perhaps at first. So just being forgiving of yourself in that regard.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I remember the one time that I did a virtual phone interview. No, sorry, it was like record yourself. There's a startup that does that. It's out of Toronto. It was so difficult. I kept looking at the wrong direction. I was like, oh, I'm looking at the ceiling too much. So yeah, definitely kind of, help. It feels a little different and weird, and it helps to practice if you can beforehand. So yeah, thanks for those tips. Najla, how about you? Do you have some tips on this? Like, how can folks stand out in that CV and that interview?
I think Julia did a wonderful job of touching so many different points. So I apologize if I'm repeating what she's saying, but hopefully that will hammer some of the things home. So I 100% agree with her. I think your resume is going to be your story. I personally, cover letters are good, but I think if you can convey the same story in your resume, it's more powerful. I think the point of your resume is not to list every single thing that you've ever done on it. It is to show the impactful things that you've done. So if there's a way for you to put in the impact that something that you've done has had, and you don't have to, like, the thing is, we're not looking for people who have a year of experience to have, like, led an organization or anything like that. But what impact did it have to your team, to your department, to the organization? You can find ways to connect that with a KPI or some outcome that you think garnered some sort of positive response. I think that's really, really important. And not to get too verbose. So you have to sort of find that balance between giving the right amount of information, not making it too short, but also not making it so long and so many bullet points. Because what ends up happening, and I don't know if this happens to Julia or Sarah, I go a little bit cross-eyed, right? Because it's just a little bit of an overwhelming resume, and you're trying to absorb everything. So it's a story that you're going to tell. And if you have gradual experience, tell the story that way. When I started on the admin side as a junior person, here are some of the things that I did that were more tactical. And as I moved on in my career, here's the more responsibility that I achieved. The fact that you do tactical administrative things in your job now, where you've already showcased that 3 roles ago, I think will sort of again make your resume appear to be a little bit more bloated. So clean lines and really focus on the experience that you received and the achievements that you've made. I think that's really important in doing that. The other thing that I think is really important as you're going through the process is, again, understanding what the role's looking for, right? And so tailoring, like Julia said, your resume to that role, making sure it hits some of those key notes. If you see that the job posting has key items in there about teamwork and responsibility and I don't know, data work, Excel work, whatever it is, try and incorporate that in, because recruiters do go through a ton of resumes, even when it's not that busy, and so they're looking for pulling out keywords. There are some systems now that will pull those keywords out, so incorporating those in is important. But again, not bloating your resume in a way that you're just throwing everything in there and it makes no sense, that sort of thing. So just being careful about that is important. As well. And I think taking the interview process, I think just echoing what Julia says, it's really a discussion. It's really a conversation. So not being too informal, being able to respond to and do your homework and research. And quite honestly, if you don't have a ton of experience, or if you don't feel like you have as much relevant experience to the industry, or even to let's say the country or whatever else it is, if you're an international student, person coming in, I think it's really important to read, look at what's going on in the industry, have interesting things to talk about. It doesn't have to all be about what you've done. It could be about what's going on in the world, and how that relates back to what you're excited and passionate about and how you think you can achieve that. And don't underestimate your soft skills. So they used to be called soft skills, or they're more cognitive skills now. And that is things like problem solving and analytical thinking. And so showcasing those transferable skills, no matter what industry you're coming from, no matter how you want to get somewhere, is so important. Because you can learn and we can train on everything else. But there's some really key skills that we're hoping that you can demonstrate, so that we know that we can build those up in you, but we also know that we can knowledge transfer quite easily too as well.
Thanks, Najaa. Yeah, some great points from both Julia and Najaa on this. So Sarah, let's get some of your views on this as well. Also, I would also like to touch upon, and it's also somebody's asked this question, so maybe you can dive into it. Are there, certifications and programs that folks can do to make themselves more attractive for environmental jobs, especially if they're trying to, cross sectors? Maybe they did engineering, but they're looking to, go into more the sustainability side of things.
Yeah, and so I guess I would be giving out the same advice as the other panelists. And I think where I can kind of dive into this question is with those transferable skills. And again, a lot of our research that when we survey employers and all of the different stakeholders, it is the soft skills that are missing. People are graduating from different programs with the right technical skills, but the soft skills are missing. And so if I were trying to change careers, what I would probably be doing is looking at the jobs that I want and figuring out what I have in comparison to what they're asking for, and then following up with, the things that you can. So, I mean, there's lots of transferable skills that would apply and that you're not going to get that knowledge until you're actually in the job. So this is where I would encourage people to use their cover letter for those things, because that's really your opportunity to kind of say, hey, I know I don't have exactly the experience you're looking for, but here's the experience I do have and where I see it fitting into what you're looking for, and here's what makes me a great candidate, and really using that as your opportunity to demonstrate to whoever is reading it. And I like to just sort of really nail down the point about tailoring your resume and making it really simple to read, because again, recruiters are reading a ton of resumes. Obvious things stick out, like errors, formatting, that kind of thing. So don't allow yourself to get caught up in any of that. And so just really making sure that your resume is polished, it's got what it needs to have, but doesn't have anything extra. It just makes it easier for the person reading it. And especially when you're working with, maybe a larger organization that has an HR department that there's a million different roles in the organization, they're not going to be an expert on every role. And so you have to make it really obvious the skill set that you do have. People can't read in between the lines. It's not just calling everybody up and saying like, hey, can you explain what you meant by this? So, having somebody that you trust that you can run through it with, I think would be a really great thing to do, just to make sure that it's clear. Like, hey, do you understand what I'm trying to say here? Yeah, so that's one thing that I would just sort of continue on what the other panelists have said. In terms of some of the designations or certifications, I'll just talk more about EcoCanada, because we have our environmental professional designation is something that people anybody can really apply for it. You can fast track it if you have a certain amount of work experience in one of the areas, or you can be an EPT, so an environmental professional in training. And so that is going to get you so many different opportunities to chat with the kind of people that you're looking to move into whatever industry it may be, or they have the position that you're looking for. It's going to open doors in terms of training and all the different opportunities that we put on for our members. And then we also have a ton of courses right now, and we had this before COVID, but it's just going to be more robust as we move forward, but on those soft skills. So technical writing or environmental laws, we've got courses on. So any of those things that you can take and add to your resume, while I'm working in this particular career, my goal is to move over into this industry, and here's what I'm doing to facilitate that, I think are, really good things that everybody should be doing to help themselves out.
Yeah, that's some great advice, and yeah, it's good that you mentioned kind of the writing skills. So I work for the government, and writing skills are extremely important for us. I mean, you have to be not just a good writer, but also like somebody who can write an issue in a page. So that concise writing as well. So definitely skills that are more and more, we go virtual, and you're probably not presenting in front of folks, but sending them, a slide deck or a pager on something. So definitely important skills that everyone needs kind of built up. So I'll go to a few audience questions, and then we'll do a breakout room. So one of the questions that, it's to all the panelists is, so David asks, is it worth it to have our LinkedIn's resumes professionally built? Can hiring managers tell the difference? Julia, do you want to take it?
For sure. To be completely transparent, I don't think it's necessarily something that is required. I think we have so many resources on the internet at our disposal, and tutorials, and I don't think it's necessarily worth paying someone to professionally do a resume, again, when there's just so many tools that you can find online. And again, I think people have the tendency, again, to kind of overcomplicate their resumes, and really, I think, again, like our other panelists have said, I think as long as your messaging is strong, you're tailoring your resume to what the job description is detailing. I think that's more important than like a flashy format, or or someone who recommends a professionally built resume as their services. Again, I just think anyone can make an effective resume, as long as you do a bit of homework, a bit of searching online, and asking an older colleague or just a friend to give your resume an extra peek too. I think that goes a long way. I don't necessarily think that having someone professionally build your resume is required, although feedback is always great. So if you have individuals that you trust, and that you trust to give an extra read through, I think that's going to go further, in all honesty.
I'm muted again. Okay, Najaa and Sarah, do you, either of you have any strong views about whether folks should get their resumes or LinkedIn's professionally done? Can you ever tell a difference, if someone's used professional services, or they're doing it themselves?
I don't think you can tell the difference unless you know the person individually. I don't think that it's necessarily something that you need to pay for. I think feedback, obviously, like we've mentioned, is important. So have somebody else read it. Make sure it's up to date. So I've done webinars and panel interviews before where people aren't super keen to be on LinkedIn, or it's really outdated, but it is what we're using. And so if you want to have an extra way to be found, and probably the most common way to be found and to network virtually, you should have at least have it up to date. But in terms of I don't think many people are, unless you're in a sales or marketing role, you're not being evaluated on how fantastic your LinkedIn profile is, and do you have the right slogan and that kind of thing. So I wouldn't put, or as Julia said, I wouldn't overcomplicate it, but making sure it's up to date, that it reflects well, it's professional. Maybe you're following certain organizations or leaders that would sort of stand out to the jobs that you're applying for. That's sort of what I would encourage people to do.
Thanks.
I think Sarah and Julia both made really great points, so I won't add too much to it. I do think, I think LinkedIn is eventually, or a version of LinkedIn is eventually going to be the way that we go. So we're going to move away from probably your traditional resume, and you're going to have a living and breathing sort of profile that allows you to showcase and demonstrate the things that you can do. And networking is going to become even more important in that process. So it's important today, but I think it's going to become even more important. And LinkedIn will be, I think, LinkedIn or a version of it will really be key in how we do this. So don't go look at my profile. I haven't updated in a long time, but go look at Julia's, or go look at, there's so many people out there that probably Julia says no as well. Okay. Sarah, maybe, I don't know, but LinkedIn's great. A lot of people have open profiles, so I highly encourage you, just look around. Like, you don't need to go far to probably find someone with outstanding an outstanding LinkedIn profile that uses it regularly, and I'm sure they won't mind you if you sort of take what they're doing and try and incorporate it into your profile. I think that's how a lot of us learn and how a lot of us build our experience online and showcase things. So I wouldn't be afraid to do some creeping, as it's called, some LinkedIn creeping, and just to see if there's anybody out there that you're connected to that has some great profiles, and use that as a platform, a starting point.
Yeah, that's a good advice. See what some other folks are doing, and kind of that helps with kind of creating a template. So we have a couple of other questions from the audience. However, I think we're going to go into breakout rooms. So some of the participants can ask you those questions directly. We'll have one panelist in each of the breakout rooms. So we'll have 3 of them. And Lucas, are we ready to do that, or should I ask another question from the audience?
Let's do one more question. I'm just organizing the breakout rooms, and then we'll start them in about 5 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So here's a question from Marta. She wants to hear about, if you are on a work permit and a newcomer to Canada, should you put that on your resume? What is the opinion of that? Najaa, do you want to start with that? Take that question.
Sure. I think if you're eligible to work in Canada, you're eligible to work in Canada. I don't think you need to put it on your resume. I don't see it for a good candidate in a good company. I don't see it deterring anyone in any way. So, I don't think it should be a thought process of whether to put it on or not. I think you're eligible to work in the country, and that's the important part. And I think any company would be fine that wants a good candidate.
Yeah. Any other views? Julia? Yeah, Julia.
I absolutely agree. I don't think it's necessary. If it's something that an individual felt they wanted to have on there, again, I would never deter someone from doing that, because it is your resume and it is your choice, of course. But again, I don't think that should be a factor. If you're legally entitled to work in Canada, then that's that. And I don't think anyone should feel obligated to have that on there. But it's the personal choice as well. And if that's something that an individual felt they should have on there, great, that's your choice. But I don't think it's something organizations would necessarily need to see. Okay,
yeah, sounds good. Sarah, any thoughts on this?
No, I don't have any. I'm of the same opinion that if you're legally entitled to work in Canada, then it's a non-issue. But I would my experience in HR has had, students perhaps that have applied that have work visas that have conditions like they can only take work in certain areas or for a certain amount of time and that kind of thing. So if you have restrictions like that, I think it's important to bring that up just because it might impact an employer. For instance, with our funding, that would make you ineligible in some cases. So sometimes it does matter. And so you just want to have those conversations maybe at the beginning as opposed to at the end of, the interview process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially if you're, availing of programs, it might be important what your status is. I think we're ready to go into our breakout rooms. We've also lost a few folks. So I'm thinking there are another breakout rooms.
Not sure. Maybe they're not keen to jump into the breakout rooms.
No, because I got one of those pop-ups to be like, oh, you're being asked to join a breakout. So I wonder if a few people joined.
I accidentally opened them and closed them back down. So we should be good. I'll quickly open up now and everybody should be moved.
Here, as I see the numbers go up, hopefully all of you had a chance to talk to your fellow participants as well as the panelists. As I mentioned in the room I was in, if you have questions, that you still have questions that couldn't get answered, I'd encourage you to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get them answered. Maybe do a follow-up on it. And maybe I'll hand it over to Lucas. Lucas, do you think we have time to maybe take another question, or should we wrap up here?
I think we're ready, unless anybody has a really burning question that they've got to ask. I haven't seen too many that haven't been answered. So maybe we could move into some kind of closing comments from the panelists and then wrap up.
Okay, that sounds great. I'd like to thank the panelists for their time today once more. Before we wrap this up, I think I want to, hear from you again, give us a few tips, like 2 tips to our panelists about job searching. Let's start with Sarah.
All right, 2 tips. 1 tip would be networking. So using the power of LinkedIn or your 7 degrees of, connections to reach out to different people who, maybe like you don't need something from right now, but and vice versa. They don't, that they don't need something from you right now, but just establish those relationships so that you can call upon them when you do. And then it comes across a lot more genuine. So just, even on LinkedIn, commenting on somebody's article or, reaching out saying, today, like I saw you in this conversation, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. It doesn't hurt. It's always well received. And so I think that that's something that everybody should do. And then a second tip would be to have, and I think it was in your upcoming session, but like an elevator pitch. So just have like who you are and what you're looking for, just a few sentences so that whenever you're kind of called upon, you've got a comfort with that so you know what to say. Because I think sometimes we know what we're capable of and we know what we've done, but we don't always say it. And so if you practice it, you'll feel a lot better when you are called upon to do that, or when you have to just quickly write it down and send an email, or if you meet somebody in a conversation like this and they say, oh, I actually have an opportunity, and then you can be prepared that way. So those are things that those would be my tips.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah. There are some amazing tips. Let's go to Najaa. Give us 2 tips.
We talked a lot about LinkedIn in our conversation in the breakout room. So a couple of things I'll reiterate it for the people that weren't able to join in. You don't have to go through this journey alone. So involve others in your journey, whether it's trying to find mentors within your networks, whether it's your friends, your family. If you do something to, update your resume or your LinkedIn profile, feel free to send it to them. Don't even tell them why. Just say, what do you hear from this? Or what do you see from this resume? What am I looking for? Or what type of industry do I want to get into? And just let them make a guess. And then if they're, they're sort of like humming and hawing, okay, maybe I need to go back and revise. Or maybe they'll get it bang on, which is great too as well. So really use your network around you, and exactly what Sarah says, engage, have those dialogues. It's funny, Kartik, I think, he posted my profile along with everybody else's, and sort of was like, we're really excited to have, this person join us. And I kind of commented on it, and he said, oh, I got a ton of engagement from it. And I was like, I totally forget sometimes on LinkedIn when you do that, it goes to your network. And so it's a great way to get some notice and to get people involved in the discussion about you and build your profile as an individual. So I really think you should, involve people in your journey and really spend time on your resume and profile. I think that's definitely a good key takeaway from our discussion today.
Okay, thank you so much, Najaa. And Julia, let's hear 2 tips from you.
All right. So I guess as well, I just wanted to say, again, we've spoken a lot about LinkedIn. Would love for any of you to connect with me on LinkedIn after this discussion. And that way as well, if you have any questions for me or any additional tips you want to know, you can message me and let me know. I am on LinkedIn all day, every day. In terms of my 2 tips, I think it's really important to try things. Again, whether you're switching career paths or you're just getting started in your career, I think don't be afraid to work for new industries or work for new companies, or again, take that chance and try that short-term contract, because I think it's really important to keep as many doors open as possible. I think that's how you meet people. And I don't think there's such a thing as a bad opportunity when it comes to professional development. So I think just not being afraid to consider positions you might not have considered before, because you never know what that could lead to. I've had so many candidates that I've met with over the years who took something, whether it was maybe a short-term position or even a permanent one that they didn't think would be a long-term fit, and now they couldn't envision their career going any other way. So I think that's important, just to try new things and don't limit yourself in terms of what you are and are not open to from a professional standpoint. And I think my second tip is, again, kind of what I mentioned earlier: be patient. Don't be hard on yourself. This is a really unique time. And so again, just not beating yourself up if it's taking a little longer than you thought, or if you have an interview that you felt to be a little awkward, because everyone has felt that way during this in one way or another. So just being forgiving and patient with yourself in your job search. So
Thank you, Julia. There's some amazing tips. So I'll compile them and we'll share them through our CEP Ottawa LinkedIn and other mediums. Again, thanks to our amazing panelists. We had a really great discussion. There are some great points in here, and I'm sure everyone who's joined this panel would have learned something new and useful to their own job search. So thank you all for joining us today. And I'll hand it over to Lucas to wrap it up.
Thanks, Pallavi. So quick warning to everybody, we're going to do a group photo in 1 minute. So just get ready for when I tell you to turn on your camera. Thanks, of course, all of the panelists. This was a really interesting panel, and I think anybody who's actually on that job search has definitely gained a lot from this. Thanks, Pallavi, for your excellent moderation. Thanks to the rest of the CEP team for helping to put this together and helping to promote it to get everybody here and learning from this. I encourage you to stay involved. If you haven't already gotten a series ticket, look out for it. Get the series ticket for 2 things. We're going to get a lot more hands-on in the future events. So on November 10th, we're going to do a resume review workshop where we're actually interacting a lot more than this one. And a couple of other workshops, as you can see on the website. We also have the Slack channel, which is a great place to just kind of do some informal networking and reach out to people and introduce yourself and build that way. Best way to stay up to date with our stuff is via email and on our LinkedIn group. And this event will be posted on YouTube by the time the next event is live. So we're releasing these all for free in the future, just in case you want that. Good luck on your job search. And we're going to do our little picture here. So can everybody please turn on your camera? If not, that's totally fine. But let's just go, wait for everybody to get ready. And then I know it's late, but thank you for bearing with us here. So 3, 2, 1, and smile. All right, so you got that one. We'll do one more. 3, 2, 1. Okay, that should be enough. Thanks so much, everybody. If you want to stick around, there's no obligation to stick around and you can leave at any time, but I'm gonna create one big breakout room so you can do some informal networking if you want after this event. Thanks, everybody, again, and good luck on the job hunt.